In this video, we are going to talk about the Brazilian morphoclimatic domains, covering aspects such as their vegetation, hydrography, location, relief, among other things. All of this in the concise, illustrated way I know you like. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you're doing well. I'm Paulo, your geography teacher. As always, it's an honor to have you here with me on Geo Ilustrada. And in today's video, we're talking about the Brazilian morphoclimatic domains. We're going to talk about all of them, all right? But before anything else, let's start by defining, right? What exactly are morphoclimatic domains after all? You probably saw this in school and didn't understand a thing. This concept was defined by the Brazilian geographer Aziz Absaber. So what is a morphoclimatic domain? Here, I'll give you a summarized and simplified definition, all right? It's a geographic area covering hundreds of thousands of square kilometers with similar characteristics in terms of relief, soil, vegetation, climate, and hydrography. Pretty straightforward, right? And here, Aziz Absaber is going to make an important distinction. He says that every morphoclimatic domain has a main area that has a certain homogeneity regarding the aspects I mentioned earlier. He calls this area the core area. That would be the central area of each domain, so to speak. And there are also the transition zones, which you can see there on this little map. In these zones, the characteristics of each domain won't be so distinct. In fact, they can even mix together, right? Mix the characteristics of one domain with another. Now that we've understood what morphoclimatic domains are, let's talk about each of them, okay? Let's start here with the Sea of Hills. Well, this domain has a large latitudinal extension. In other words, it stretches a long way from north to south, covering a large part of the Brazilian coastline. Consequently, it will also have a great climatic variability. However, the humid tropical climate predominates. In other words, it's a hot climate with frequent rainfall. That's also why its river system will have a large volume of water. And here we have as highlights the river basins, the Paraná River Basin, and also the São Francisco Basin, which will pass through other domains, okay? But it also includes the domain of the Sea of Hills. As for the relief of this domain, as the name suggests, there is a strong presence of hills. And here we have rounded or mamelonized hills. This name sounds strange, but it's widely used. You have to understand that it refers to hills with rounded tops. This is due to the weathering process, which strongly affects the area. And here, this terrain can also reach great altitudes. As an example, we have the famous Cerrado Domain, which covers the states of Santa Catarina, São Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro, which lies at elevations ranging from 500 to 1,300 meters, with peaks that can even exceed this limit. Regarding the soil, we have two types that stand out. The Massapi soil, which is formed from the decomposition of granite and gneiss, and the Salbarão. It's a more sandy or clay soil. And regarding the vegetation, we have the famous Atlantic forest vegetation, which is a large forest. If you're watching this later, and I've released the exclusive Atlantic forest video, I'll link it here in the card above. Now let's talk about the Caatinga Domain. This domain covers an area of approximately 850,000 square kilometers, and it's mostly located in the northeastern region of Brazil. As you know, the predominant climate in this region is the semi-arid climate, right? Which is dry. And this consequently also affects the local hydrography, resulting essentially in seasonal rivers, right, which are present only at certain times of the year. And there's a great scarcity of rain throughout the year. And this characteristic will also directly affect the characteristics of the soil. If we have little moisture, we will consequently have little weathering. In this way, the soils here, in general, are shallower and more stony. I've been talking a lot about weathering. If you don't know what that is, watch this video here. It's up here in the card, okay? The area's relief is marked by interplateau depressions, with emphasis on the so-called Sertaneja Depression, which is essentially an area lower than those around it, and it basically covers all the states in the Northeast region. Also standing out in this domain's landscape are more rugged landforms like those Inselbergs. I'll leave it on the screen for you to take a look. And the vegetation in the area is the Caatinga vegetation, which is a type of vegetation essentially more adapted to the dry climate, right? The so-called xerophytic vegetation. All right, everything clear so far, right? Now let's move on to the Cerrado Domain. This domain is essentially located in the central west region of Brazil. It also extends into the country's northern, northeastern, southeastern, and southern regions. It is the second largest domain in Brazil, with an area of approximately 1.9 million square kilometers. Its terrain is characterized by relatively flat plateaus, with average altitudes there of about 600 meters. However, there are some peaks that can reach up to 1,700 meters, even exceeding this altitude, such as the Chapada dos Veadeiros in Goiás and the Serra do Espinhaço in Minas Gerais. The region's climate is also very characteristic, known as the seasonal tropical climate, which has well-defined seasons. The summer is hot and rainy, and the winter tends to be colder and drier. Because of this, the vegetation also adapts to these characteristics. And there, we also have very characteristic vegetation, right? That of the Cerrado biome, which has that savanna-like appearance. Anyone who has seen the Lion King movie knows what I mean. They are shorter, more twisted trees and shrubs with thick bark. That's why here, the Cerrado biome is also called the Brazilian savanna. The hydrography of this domain also has a very peculiar characteristic and nickname. It is called Brazil's water tower. That already suggests its importance, right? Because in this domain, there are riverbeds and springs of 8 of Brazil's 12 river basins, with emphasis on the São Francisco River Basin and the Tocantins Araucaria Basin. The soil of this domain is marked by the so-called latasols. These are well-weathered and deep soils, but even so, in general, they are poor and acidic. They require a lot of correction for use in agriculture. All right, stay strong. We still have the Araucaria, Grassland, and Amazonian domains left. Right, this time it might get a bit long, but I have to do it. Well, the Araucaria Domain covers an area of approximately 400,000 square kilometers, and it is predominantly present there in the southern region of the country. Its terrain is marked by the presence of plateaus, with altitudes ranging from 800 to 1,300 meters. It has a rolling landscape with mountain ranges. The climate of the region is subtropical with well-defined seasons, that is, cold winters and hot summers. As for the vegetation, we have the predominant presence of Araucaria trees, right? Which give the name to the domain. Also called the pine forest. It is a forest, not very dense, right? Marked by the presence of Araucaria trees. As I said, they are conifers. In general, the soil in the region is deep, marked by the presence of the so-called latasols. And here we also have the presence of the so-called terra roxa, mainly in the state of Paraná. Actually, it's not purple soil, right? It's a very reddish soil. Regarding hydrography, the region also has good hydrographic potential, including the Paraná and Uruguay river basins. And there we also have the Itaipu Dam, which is the largest hydroelectric plant in the country, right? Located in the state of Paraná. Now, the domain of the Grasslands, which is the smallest Brazilian morphoclimatic domain, with an area of approximately 80,000 square kilometers. And it is located there essentially in Rio Grande do Sul, right? The south of the country. It also extends into Uruguay and Argentina. Its relief in general is low, with features of hills, which are those small, very rounded hills. They are also called coxilhas, okay? Pay attention to this term, because it's very important. And these characteristics make this area widely used, mainly for livestock, right? Cattle raising. In general, its soil is very fertile, with a lot of variation in terms of depth. Its vegetation is predominantly low-growing, with the presence of herbaceous plants and grasses, right? That characteristic vegetation of the pampas in Rio Grande do Sul. Regarding the climate, here we already have a very important characteristic, which is the fact that it is located in the southern region. In other words, there is already a predominance of temperate climate, which has that very typical characteristic of well-defined seasons. Hot summers and cold winters. And its hydrography, although it doesn't have very large rivers, has a perennial drainage. What does that mean? It is simply the largest Brazilian morphoclimatic domain, with an area that ranges from 3.5 to 4 million square kilometers, being predominant there in the northern region of Brazil, even though it extends into other states and even into other countries. The climate of the region is equatorial, right? The equator runs through its northernmost part, being hot and humid practically all year round. This also gives the domain a very extensive river network, with emphasis on the Amazon basin, which drains about 20% of the world's freshwater volume. Besides that, We also have in this domain the Amazon River, which is also the largest river in the world. In terms of water volume, the Amazon River is also the largest in the world. In general, the relief of the Amazon domain is low, right? It has low altitudes, which usually doesn't exceed 200 meters. But even so, we have the presence of Pico da Neblina there, which is simply the highest peak in Brazil, right? The highest point in Brazil, with about 3,014 meters of altitude. Regarding the vegetation, we have an interesting characteristic, which is that it takes on different aspects, thanks to the periodic change in river levels. And here we have what's called terra firme forest, várzea forest, and Igapo forest. The first is the kind that is never flooded, the one that is periodically flooded, and the one that is permanently flooded, respectively. The soil in the region, counterintuitively, is not very fertile. We usually think the opposite, right? That it's very fertile soil, but it's not. Still, it has a lot of decomposed material, the so-called humus, right? That's the decomposed or decomposing organic material, and that's exactly what sustains that vast forest. But look, if you want to know a little more about the Amazon domain, I made a video exclusively about it, okay? It's showing up on your screen. I'm also leaving a video about the Brazilian biomes on your screen to complement what you saw here. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the video. Happy studying. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. See you next time. Bye.